Right, so let's now turn to agent causal libertarianism. So for the agent causalist, actions are caused by agents. What do I mean by that? Persons. So when I pick up my cup, take my sip, that's caused by me. This seems like a really intuitive view, no? We usually think of people, agents, who are the ones doing the causing. Um, Now, the event causal libertarian doesn't deny that it's people who do the causing. They just think that talk of, or what's really happening when I pick up the cup, is causation in terms of events involving a person. Whereas for the agent causalist, they think that there's something more fundamental about the agent or person, right? So beliefs, desires, and other mental states, other psychological states are still going to be part of the story. If you're an agent causalist, you aren't just going to say that Ben picks up the mug and that's the end of the story, that he's the cause of picking up the mug. It's still going to involve talk of my beliefs and desires, or my belief there's a mug there, my desire to take a sip, and so on. But an irreducible part of that story is going to involve talk about me as a person, as an agent. I can't just be removed from the story in a sense to talk about my beliefs and desires, because my beliefs and desires don't settle what I'm going to do. I, as an agent, I'm the one who settles it. I decide that beliefs and desires are going to be effective in action, even if beliefs and desires are still part of the causes of what I do. So the irreducibility here is the sort of crucial part about agent causalism. Like, we can't reduce talk, or we can't reduce the agent into talk of things involving the agent. The agent has to be there in some way. So if we're talking about an example like Simon stole the apples, our explanation of why he stole it would have its focus on him as the agent, as the cause, as the one who brought it about. He's the one that settled that the apples were stolen. Now consider how this form of libertarianism responds to the basic argument. So remember the point of the basic argument. Where does true responsibility enter the picture? Where's the free enough action so that we get this true responsibility? Well, agent causal libertarians here say, well, you get this true responsibility and this free enough action when the agent, in her capacity as an agent, as a substance, it can't be reduced to talk of mental events. When she, the agent, causes her action, or causes her decisions, or causes her choices. And so for most agent causal libertarians, they're happy to say that the world is governed by events causing other events. You know, the wind causes the tree branch to fall. An event involving the wind causes an event involving the tree branch to fall. The waves knock into the ship. These all involve events causing other events. But actions for the agent causalists are fundamentally different. Actions just are a little bit different from everything else in nature. Actions are caused by agents. They're not caused by events, or at least not solely by events. Agents are an irreducible, essential part of the story there. But importantly, this makes actions significantly different from other events. We might either think of actions as a type of event, or you might think of actions as just a different thing from events. Events are things which are ungoverned by agency, you might think, on this view, whereas actions are governed by agency. And it's the agent that is doing the most crucial causal work in the story of why an action came about. And so for the agent causalist, because we have this agent performing this irreducible causal role, we get this free enough action and we get true responsibility entering the picture. So one thought here is to say that the fact that actions are significantly different from other events is that we get a kind of self-creation. In fact, Roderick Chisholm, a famous proponent of agent causalism, talks about free actions being like unmoved movers. You know, they're the sort of actions are the things which come about without any real any prior cause. It's the agent who comes in, it comes into the story, and who makes the action happen. And so here we might seemingly get this kind of free will, and maybe even sidesteps worries about self-creation, because it's really about the action that's being caused. We might also understand it as self-creation occurring in the choice. So the agent comes in and makes themselves such that they cause the choice. So whilst there's quite a lot intuitive and natural about the agent causalist story, it's very, very controversial. There are many elements to it that might seem, ultimately, as we'll see, a little bit mysterious or a little bit unclear. So you might have noticed in the explanation, a lot of the talk just comes down to the agent or the person who's doing the causing. And that's sort of the end of the story for the agent causalist. In a way, there's not much else that the agent causalist can say, because ultimately that's what they think. The agent is a substance, is a kind of thing that is fundamentally different from other things in nature. And the way they cause things is fundamentally different from how other things are caused. So let's, in light of that, we can think about Strawson's own criticism of agent causalism. So for Strawson, the worry is that, agent causalism is implicitly invoking a self that is distinct from our characters, preferences, and motivations, right? And so the idea here is we have this self that appears and it picks from our characters' preferences and motivations, and then it causes the action. And so in effect, the self is almost sort of choosing from the mental elements, the elements of self, and deciding which are really the self or which are really going to be the things that move us to action. But Strawson's point here is like, well, how are we supposed to understand the kind of decision made by the self, right? So normally when we think about decisions, it's from a background of, characters, preferences, and motivations. The kind of decisions we make are informed by our characters, our preferences, and our motivations. And so the reason why you do any particular thing will usually be explained in terms of that. But the agent causalist, you're trying to figure out why particular aspects of character, particular preferences, or particular motivations are the ones that actually move you to action. The actual choice there between these different mental elements, it's not clear on what basis that's made, because the self is supposed to be distinct from these mental elements, but yet is picking from them. And so there's a little bit of mystery here about what's actually happening. It's not clear that we can really make sense of it. And on the one hand, it's mysterious because it's not really clear what's happening, but it's unclear whether that means it's incoherent. It's at least not clear that it's coherent from what I've said so far, but it's not clear that it's incoherent. I think it's worth going over this a bit more time in a bit more explicit detail, right? So take Simon, our agent who stole the apples. He's going to have a particular set of character, preferences, and motivation. These are all symbolized by these little black circles. There are going to be a lot more in Simon. He's going to have a lot more bits of character, a lot more preferences, and a lot more motivations, right? But for the agent causalist, the causal story, when it comes to a decision or a choice and the resulting action, you're going to have a person with their character, preferences, and motivations. And then their self is going to be there, and their self is going to choose from these characters, preferences, and motivations to bring about particular actions. And then we get this kind of agent causation, because the agent self, who they are, the agent, is the one that's sort of picking from these mental elements to produce actions. And so here we get this kind of clear, at least potentially coherent. I don't think there's anything obviously incoherent about this story. There's a very mysterious that it's not really clear how we get this self that comes out separately. And there's remaining questions about how to understand what that choice is like. So I see Strawson's point there, but I don't think we've seen enough to see that it's positively incoherent. But it's still true that there's something mysterious, there's at least something mysterious, because it's not clear on what basis Simon's self makes the choice between these different mental elements, these different characters, preferences, and motivations. So then it's not clear what it means to say that an action like a theft is agent caused, because we have this elements of the sort of causal story are just left a little bit unclear, a little bit mysterious. Just to compare this with the sort of event causalist story here, all the event causalist is going to say is, well, Simon has these characters, preferences, and motivations, and those constitute his self. And at certain points, if you're Robert Kane, there's going to be torn decisions, and certain aspects of character, preferences, and motivation are going to win out over competing aspects of character, preferences, and motivation. And those that win out become his sort of dominant character and preferences and motivation. His dominant self become who he is. And in that moment, he'll perform a particular action because certain aspects of his self went out. And when those aspects of self went out, that'll be what cause his actions in future. And Simon will still be the ultimate source because, it was his own mental states, his own exercise of plural voluntary control at this earlier time that led to this decision working. This is not to say that there's not any mystery in Kane's story. There certainly is. There's certainly some speculation about there being indeterminism at the micro level at just the right time. But at least on its own, it's a less mysterious picture, conceptually speaking, if not empirically speaking, than the agent causalist picture. Here, Simon causes his act of theft in virtue of his character, preferences, and motivation causing the theft. Still an action of his because it involves mental states of his. For the agent causalist, it's an action of the agents only if the agent themselves does the causing. But then we're left with a mystery of what does that mean? So we've reached the end of the lecture, but before going on, I briefly want to mention some sort of epistemological worries with libertarianism. So all forms of libertarianism face epistemic worries. It's just very hard to know on these views whether we actually have such free will. And as I just mentioned, event causalism has some of the biggest epistemic worries. The epistemic worries are in large part because it depends on certain empirical claims that we don't have any reason to believe are true, or at least we haven't got strong evidence in favor of it. It so far hasn't been ruled out by current science, but as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been given any strong evidence in its favor. And part of the worry is that even if science were to show, well, there is indeterminism in the brain, we don't yet know if it's the right kind of indeterminism. So there's a lot more that needs to be worked out. And so given this, we don't know, or we don't have sufficient justification, one might claim, to think that we have free will in the sense that event causal libertarians think. Or at least another way to think of it is the event causal libertarian has a big epistemic challenge. They might believe in their heart of hearts that we have free will in this sense, but it's not yet clear we quite have the justification for believing it. Likewise, the agent causalist has a similar problem. Even if agent causation is coherent, I think there's an open question about that. We don't know that we're agent causing things at the right times either. We don't know that we're even doing it at all. So it might be that, there are conceptually possible beings somewhere out in the sort of either in our universe or in some imagined world who can agent cause things. Maybe those exist, but we don't know that human beings are such agents. And one philosopher who's a hard incompatibilist, who we'll talk about a lot in lecture 4, called Derek Perboom, he thinks that agent causation is coherent, but he thinks that current science speaks against us having agent causal powers. He thinks that empirical evidence suggests that there's no agent causation. In fact, causation is just by events causing other events. And that's what our best science says. And given that, he thinks that we should be skeptics about free will. So that's where we're going to leave the lecture today. We've been considering the prospects of libertarianism, considering event causal and agent causal libertarian accounts of free will. Let me just emphasize that we focused on certain forms of event causal and agent causal libertarianism, but there are many other forms out there. And it's worth bearing that in mind, that the prospects of event causal libertarianism, agent causal libertarianism don't stand or fall with the forms that we've considered here. But at least these are the most popular forms. And these are the ones that people commonly associate with these views. And so the kinds of objections you're going to get to event causalism and agent causalism are going to be of the same kind of structure and form. And you'll find that with many of the sort of contemporary forms of event causalism that build on Keynes' work or that respond to Keynes' work, they are very much influenced by his work. And the problem of luck is going to be a key problem there. When it comes to agent causalism, problems of coherence are very big. But others have also pressed the problem of present luck for agent causalism. So some people will try and argue that agent causalism is preferable to event causalism because it avoids this problem, but many philosophers have come along and said, no, agent causalism also faces this problem too. So there's a lot more going on here than we can fit in the lecture, but I hope we've got all got a good sense of the kinds of things that are happening, and we have clear lines of investigation if we wish to pursue these issues more deeply.